let's talk about Season 1 of the BurnCast.
Season 1, all ready and done.
Yep. It's been a fun ride so far. Interesting. Lots of ups and downs.
Yeah, I think, the best thing about doing this is just how much fun it's been.
Yeah.
Despite the amount of work that it can be sometimes, especially for a side project, it's been incredibly fun. And that's been the best part about it for sure.
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about how our expectations for what the show would be like, as opposed to how it turned out, have changed a lot over the first season.
Things are never the way that you expect them to go, but just how off the track it went was quite funny.
Yeah. So we can talk a little bit about where the idea for this show came from, just to start. Well, Kim and I are writers.
Yeah.
And before we made the show, we often used to just read sort of amateur level writing just for fun. And we would go back and forth and talk about things we read and critique them for each other, sort of as a way for us to refine our own critical eye and to see how we can improve our own work.
Yeah.
And we found that it was a lot of fun to do that. We found some really funny stories, some really silly stuff.
Yeah, we started with this idea that we should learn from worse people, but then it sort of diverged into us sitting there for hours and hours laughing our asses off at what people have written, and that I think that spun into the idea for the show.
Yeah,
it was funny though because we did sit around on the idea for a long time. We were like, oh man, we should just record ourselves. It's good.
For more than a year or something, we had the idea to do this. And we did sit down and think it would be that easy to just record ourselves. And we quickly discovered once we eventually got to the point of recording that is not as easy as it sounds.
Not at all. And I mean, just getting a audio recording that doesn't sound like bollocks is enough challenge in itself.
Yeah, and you can see that in our first episode, China Strike. We didn't consider the sound quality as much as we probably should have. And so we ended up with Kim wasn't in a studio when we recorded that.
Yes.
And every episode after that, he has been in one. So this sounds a lot better.
Yeah.
But there was nothing we could do to clean up that audio, so we just do have this first episode that sounds a bit rough in some places. And I also didn't know how to make the microphone I use sound that great either, so it doesn't sound the best. But
completely inexperienced with just sound recording in general, so the first times I was flailing my arms around and not keeping my mouth close to the recorder, so there was a lot of things to learn, and some things that you think are simple are really not so simple, and but I think we're getting there now.
Yeah.
We're to the point where we've got our little habits in order and we know how to produce.
One of the things that's made things a lot easier for me editing these episodes is making the discussion more suitable to how we plan to edit it. Because China Strike originally was a 3-hour long episode.
Yeah.
It was actually more than 3 hours, and I cut it down to 3 hours, and we thought that was going to be our format, a 3-hour podcast.
Yeah, 3-hour episodes.
But as we sent it to some people and had some test listenings, they often dropped off after the first hour. They said, it's funny, it's interesting, I like it, but I stopped listening after the first hour. And so that's when we were like, well, we should probably cut this down. There is a lot of bullshit here. A lot of the original discussion of China Strike, we went through literally everything in that book. We weren't very picky with what we kept in that episode. We just kept everything.
Yeah, it was commentary on the book. It was really play by play all the way through.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we were ambitious, I think, with our ideas of what was going to be good and funny and interesting.
Yeah.
And we really did think that people would sit down for 3 hours, even though when I listen to podcasts, I am not listening for 3 hours. So I don't know where I had that idea from, but
yeah, I mean, it also comes a lot with reputation. I mean, no one knew our show as of the first episode. So of course, you're giving a lot of trust to someone to say, hey, I don't know you. I don't know your show. I don't know what it's about. I'm going to sit down and listen for 3 hours. No, that just doesn't happen.
No.
And so we also weren't really sure what the show was in essence, what the heart of it was.
Yeah.
And so we did have a lot of commentary on some of the stupid shit and some of the way it's written and also just general commentary. And we hadn't yet refined the idea of the show to be a mix of writing critique and humorous commentary on dumb shit that takes place in these books.
Yeah.
That only really came after A Bucket Full of Bullets, when we finished recording that episode and we went back and said, all right, we're going to cut that 3-hour China strike down to 1 hour. And I think it was a lot better for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think still to this day, if we had kept it that way, then I don't think anyone would have listened to it except me and you. And that was one of my original fears, is it just interesting to me? Is it really just interesting to me? But, with the small amount of growth we've had, I think, it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
I want to discuss a little bit. When we started this podcast, we had this idea that obviously there are these bad books and it's fun to read them and give them attention, when they're so not worth any attention at all.
Yeah.
But then it's sort of, as we went through, we discovered that there are many more things that were hidden under the covers, so to speak. And especially with Amazon, we discovered that there is an incredible amount of scammery and just, I don't know what to call it. At this point, there's no descriptive terminology that you can use for someone who writes a book.
Or half a book.
Yeah, in order to trick people into buying it. Because if you put no effort into writing, you can write like 2,000, 5,000 words a day if you're really just pumping out trash.
Yeah.
And then if you just upload it, I mean, who's stopping you? And there are people that will buy it.
Yeah.
Simply because just like in any media format, there are people looking for new and little things. They want to catch some unknown work and be the first reader, and so people do scour the new releases, and then they pick up a book and they buy it, and it's not even it's
sometimes it's not even a book.
Yeah.
It's just a depth of reality unknown, which is just a nonsense ramble.
So there's that, but then there's also these people that they just seem to pump out the same book over and over again.
Yeah.
And now they might write it differently, but it's the same story. And it's really weird when you start to get into it, because you see all these like werewolf romance books.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing over and over and over again. And it really makes me wonder, because I don't understand how that can be worth your time to do. Writing is an activity that you should do for fun, but trying to get money out of it's a tricky thing to do in this day and age. And it makes me wonder, are these people really collecting cash? Is it really a viable source of income?
I really think they are. I really think they are collecting a lot of money on this, because everything I read about how the successful, like self-published indie authors succeed on Amazon is through writing romance and kind of doing these copy-paste jobs. They see what's popular, they write their own version of that.
Yeah.
And there's an audience out there that just scoops it up and is willing to consume that same format over and over. And they don't care that it's the same story, as long as this time, it's featuring a gargoyle instead of a werewolf.
Yeah.
And they like that. And they're like, wow, this is a new interesting twist on the genre, even though they are just buying the same shit over and over again. And I think that's one thing we discovered as we were looking through a lot of these books. And it makes it a lot harder, to be honest, to find the ones that are really interesting to talk about.
Yeah.
And we've had some trouble with that as we moved throughout the season. There was a week we didn't release an episode because we had picked up a book that we thought was going to be funny, and it turned out not to be. We picked out another book that we thought was going to be
our backup book.
Yeah, like our backup book. More interesting to talk about, also a funny one. And that also turned out to just be boring. It was just a simple, decently written book with really nothing to talk about. And then our backup book was Galactic Redemption 4, and we can see how that turned out.
Which was like, in all terms and purposes, was the sure thing. Like, it was I know this book is going to be what I need it to be. So yeah, finding books that are good for the podcast wasn't a learning experience in itself, because it really is difficult. You don't want to find something too good, because you don't want to do like a normal book review.
Yeah, that's not really our game here.
Yeah. And so you want it to be bad enough where you can identify, like, really, what the fuck did you do here moments.
Yeah.
And I also like the idea that in a lot of these stories, there are just extremely weird scenes or scenarios, you know? Like, I loved, for example, the Manatee Murders. like little tiny scenes like Buck Williams climbing into his wife's coffin. Like, you just can't make that shit up. Like, that's just hilarious.
Or like a scene we didn't actually talk about in the episode when the first manatee shows up in the waters to our main antagonists, and it describes how like a single tear goes down the manatee's face.
Yeah.
As they point the shotgun at it.
Yeah, it's like as if it's like, don't do it. Like, please.
It's like a Disney movie.
Yeah, it's so silly. And you literally can't make that stuff up.
No.
Those are the hidden gems, you know?
Yeah, it's often hard for us to find those stories because we can pick them based on their title, based on their cover, and like the first 2 chapters usually. We can't see the whole book. And so we could have never known that Jaws of the Mantis would have turned out the way it did, that it would be about the sex robot. We could have never known the depth of reality would be so fucking weird.
Yeah.
And so broken and so batshit insane just from the first 2 chapters, because that's all Amazon lets you see before you buy it. So we often come across these books, and it is a gamble. It's a gamble every time to see, you know, is this going to be interesting to talk about? Are there going to be weird hidden things that we can identify and make into a funny, entertaining episode?
Yeah. The perfect example of that was Apocalypse Deception.
Yeah.
Which was literally, for the first 2 chapters, seemed very normal. And it was very surprising that the entirety of the book after that is just a sex scene, which it was very perplexing.
Yeah.
You know, I really can't get behind the minds of the people who write this stuff. You know, I can't see it from their point of view where they're like, this is an action book, you know, like...
Or I'm going to present this as an action book.
Yeah.
And trick some fucking idiots into reading it and thinking that they're getting John Rambo.
Yeah, and if your book is like that lewd, are you pretending it's not just a pornographic novel? Like, you know, like,
yeah,
are you doing that for yourself? Like, are you saying it's an action movie because you don't want to be like, I just wrote some smut? You want to be like, I wrote an action thing.
Yeah.
But maybe it is lying to themselves. I mean, these people must lie to themselves a little bit when they produce this stuff. But, I mean,
yeah. If they think it's ready for sale with all the errors that we find,
yeah,
and some of the structuring issues. I mean, it does seem a lot of the time like they are just putting it up for the sale.
Yeah.
Because if you're serious about your writing, you will read good writing, you'll read bad writing, you'll try to find your own middle ground, you'll try to understand why does my book succeed or why does it fail and what it sets out to do. Are there structural issues? Are there narrative pacing issues? Do I need to fucking spell check it before I try and sell it and say that it's a complete work worth your money? A lot of times we've come to realize that's not a part of the equation.
No, not at all. In fact, the opposite. Literally, they think that what their fingers type out is a masterpiece by default.
Yeah.
I really don't get how... I mean, these people just must not read books at all. Because I don't know how many books you need to read before you realize how books work, you know?
It's either that or they read a lot of stuff on Amazon and see what is the standard here.
Yeah.
They see, well, if this can make money, I have to put in at least as much effort in, which isn't too much. And then they can sell it and make their profit off of it. I think that's what deteriorates the standard of the Amazon, specifically self-published world.
Yeah.
Is that you're working in a market where your competitors are floundering.
Yeah.
And so we only have to do a little bit better than them to mark out your niche. And that's all you really got to do there.
True. I don't know how long it would take you. If you're writing at such a poor level, you can do things quite quickly.
Yeah.
So what's the hourly rate, so to speak? You make a shitty book and it takes you, I don't know, 100 hours to write or something. I don't know if I'm exaggerating. I have no idea how long it takes them. Literally, I couldn't guess at all.
How long do you think it takes to write an MIA Hunter?
I don't know. I was going to... We had an episode that we couldn't air for many reasons, the main one being sound issues. We had some sort of mistake there. But it was a guy, he was writing books from prison. And, I did a little bit of research, and he stated that he had written 20 books.
Yeah. And
co-authored some of them. 20 books in a year. Now, you might have a lot of spare time in prison. I don't doubt that. But
yeah.
I don't think, that you can write 20 books, even if you're the best writer in the world, and have those pieces be up to any sort of readable quality level.
Yeah.
So immediately I was like, oh, they're just all going to be shit. And just in case you're wondering, it was really bad.
Yeah, it was really bad. And it's a shame because that episode is quite funny.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, for many reasons, we decided not to air it. And so there are actually 2 lost episodes to the BurnCast.
And I'm sure there'll be more.
And yeah, I'm sure there will be more. There's that one and the sort of practice episode that we made before China Strike, which was never really intended to be an episode. We read something and just wanted to see how it is to sit down and record our ideas on something as opposed to how we used to do it, which is just call each other up and talk shit about a book. We tried to see what it would be like to put a little more structure to it. So that episode is a mess, obviously, because it was our first go at it. It sounds like shit. Neither of us recorded on good microphones. There were noises in the background we couldn't remove, all kinds of stuff. And it was a really good idea to do that because it taught us some things before we actually recorded our first real episode that we knew to avoid.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've read now 14 books for the podcast.
Yeah.
We've read 14 books together, and we've got the 10 episodes that we need.
Yeah.
And I think we'll keep that standard format. Hopefully in the future, we'll have a few different other shows and things. We're already bouncing ideas around and stuff for what we want to do, but I think we're trying to focus in on the base product at the moment, which is the main seasons.
Yeah, so we do have some plans to try out other formats and explore other ways to do the show or little side episodes that aren't a part of the main series. I don't think we'll ever slow down our main formats shows because they are quite fun to make and we've started to get a little better at making them. So I certainly don't want to start another learning curve anytime soon, but we have some ideas for what we will do in the future. As far as season 2 goes, that's going to be a lot like season 1.
Oh, yes.
But perhaps we'll have other little side shows popping up here and there over time.
Yeah. And I think those things will grow more as the show grows as well.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is kind of dependent on which direction it goes, but hopefully, as we've seen, it's only going to get better and better, which is really the cool thing about it, is that it's also not dated or anything like that. So it doesn't matter when you pick it up. You can just start going from season 1, episode 1.
Yeah, we do try to keep in mind some of the things we say, some of the jokes we make, not dating the show, because if you listen to it in 20 years and there's some pop culture reference in there that isn't relevant anymore, it's not going to make sense. And these books are just something we find on the internet, and they are also not too dated by their subject matter. So we do try to keep the show relatively free of dating itself so that, in 20 years, you can go back and watch season 1 or listen to season 1 and still find it funny.
Yeah. Now, maybe we'll look back at season 1 and be like, oh man, like what were we doing? Like, because we'll have learned so much that it will be a lot worse than what we're making at the time. And I hope that is true.
Yeah.
I hope that we do get a lot better at it. And as we already have become better, I think, as well.
Yeah.
Now, the best thing about the show for me, aside from the fun factor, has been also the characters.
Yes.
Because these books, they just don't get so much attention from people. Not many people are reading these things. And if they are, they're usually being forced to by friends and family.
Yeah.
So I like the idea of immortalizing some of these characters that may never see the light again.
And as far as immortalizing goes, we're also immortalizing some of these stories that are gone now. They're just gone.
Yeah.
Sword Immortal, you can still get on Zenith Publishing, but it's gone from Amazon. Depth of Reality Unknown is completely erased. And Hard Target is gone right now as well. Now, hopefully we'll see that one come back because Zeke Mitchell does seem to be, a working author and not just a made-up person like Milan Vanorin was.
Yeah. I want to talk about Milan Vanorin. I want to cut in here.
Why?
Because I was intrigued firstly by the name, because I was like, I'm sure that doesn't sound like a name to me. It just doesn't sound like it sounds like a made up name, Yeah. It sounds like someone's character that they made for their stories.
Yeah.
Now, I was looking and I realized something, that the original Amazon pages that he had uploaded to, and of course they're all down now, but you can see, like, if you click on Google Images versions of his book covers that are still lingering on the internet, even though their pages have been removed.
Yeah.
If you go in there, the original upload page is in Spanish.
Really?
Yeah, he must have uploaded them, he's either from South America or from Spain, or he's just a native Spanish speaker. And then I was like, now Milan Vinorin makes a little bit more sense. It could be like a Hispanic name.
Yeah.
Now, that also led me into thinking, okay, that also makes all of his books make more sense, as they also might be translations. Now, if you read any of his book covers, they're all like sentences that don't kind of make sense. It's all like, depth of reality unknown doesn't really make much sense. But he has other book covers as well that are all like just a random string of words together.
Some power comes with each was the Outsiders ripoff.
Yeah. Exactly. And now if you think about that and say that it's a translated, because often in these languages, everything is switched around in terms of, nouns and adjectives and things like that. So if you look at it from that perspective, then you could say, oh, okay, so he's just translated the title in Spanish to an English version and posted it.
Yeah. Wow.
I tried to search up any books he has in native tongue via like typing his name into and then having Spanish translations, or I don't know. I tried a little bit, couldn't find anything. So the only thing that I've seen from him is English books that are no longer there. But it does make Depth of Reality seem a lot more like Sword Immortal in that way, that it's a Spanish translated work that doesn't seem to have been given much afterthought.
Well, it sort of does and doesn't clarify some things. It doesn't clarify why there's no fucking ending. It doesn't clarify the fact that it's just a fucking ripoff of Final Fantasy.
Yes, no, but I could imagine, for example, that he maybe is like, I don't want to say stealing content, but plagiarizing a lot.
Yeah.
And just making fan fiction versions of very strange things. And then he's taken them, written them in Spanish, translated them into English, and pushed them out. That to me seems like the likely story. Now, I don't know for sure. I'm just speculating.
It's a very interesting development, though, for sure.
Yeah, so Milan Vinorin, possible Hispanic, possible...
Fraud.
Yeah, fraud.
Still a fraud. He could be a Spanish fraud.
Still fraud, yeah. It doesn't explain anything about the content of Depth of Reality and why he had to write about espadaddies and things like that, but,
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you didn't know that, then might be a thing. And I thought it was kind of funny because the other book that we have that's perhaps in the same league of Depth of Reality, Sword Immortal, is also a translated, except there it was stated that it was a translated work.
Yeah. It was less deceptive in that.
Yeah, and so Depth of Reality being a translated work would be a double deception, in the way that it's deceiving you that it's an actual book, it's deceiving you that it's primarily an English written thing. If it's just translated, then what the fuck,
Yeah.
So there may be more lies than you know in Depth of Reality yet. Maybe in 10 years we'll find out that so it was actually written by you just to give it to me.
From the future.
Yes.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about in this little addendum is some of our thoughts on what the worst book to read was.
Okay.
And I thought it would be fun if we also picked what our favorite episode is that we've made, but I would try to guess your favorite episode. You try to guess mine. So you have to guess what I think the worst book to read was in this season.
The worst book to read for you. I want to say, I don't know, but it's difficult because is it measured by your disappointment in what you thought it was going to be? Or is it just just page by page how painful it was? I think the most disappointing may have been Manatee Murders. I don't know how thrilled you were with that.
Yeah, I'm going to say you're right. I hated that one probably more than most of the other ones. But the worst one to physically read was probably Galactic Redemption 4. That was such a boring fucking book.
Yeah, it's so amazing how people can take cool ideas and make them so dead-ass boring. It's like an achievement that you can turn like a sci-fi opera space adventure and make it the dullest thing ever.
You can take literally Star Wars and make it the opposite of Star Wars. Now, we have a lot of gripes about Apocalypse Deception. I mostly just try to forget that book existed. And that one was terrible and cringy and painful, but at least it was really short.
True.
So I didn't find it that painful to get through.
Yeah, I think it's like a quarter of the size of like a Depth of Reality.
More like an eighth of a size. Depth of Reality is fucking long, dude. It's seriously long.
So then what was your favorite book to read?
Well, I think the funnest one to read had to be Hard Target.
Yeah, for sure.
My favorite book to read, though, maybe All Your Ruins. I did really enjoy reading that.
It was actually the book, like, because even Hard Target was still, like, kind of shittily written. I mean, there were no commas in it. Just makes it shit by default.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was definitely the most, like...
Most reading like a real book.
Yeah. And also, it was, like, dealing with actual story elements and characters that weren't just silly caricatures.
Yeah.
But I did find myself... in All Your Ruins, again, getting quite bored with a lot of the exposition. That's why writing a book, it's a funny thing because the biggest thing that you're trying to get past, especially in the modern day, is boredom.
Yeah.
You don't want your readers to be bored, and the fastest way to do that is to have too much exposition or to not have your reader intrigued.
Yeah, and All Your Ruins does get pretty boring when you're reading the same thing about how the kaiju blight works, like, over and over again.
It does, yeah.
Just, we don't need it.
It's also been a while with the books that we're reading since I've read, like, a normal book.
Yeah, because reading a book every week and editing and all this shit, like, I don't have time to read good books anymore.
Yeah, and it also tuckers you out. I'm like, I just don't want to read anything. I don't want to read anything at all after that. So,
yeah.
Compared to, I think the last thing I read was Firefall, which is just Echopraxia, a secondary book to Blindsight, an amazing sci-fi book.
Yeah.
Written so well that it just leaves you, like, behind, like, trying to keep up.
And manages to balance hundreds of themes without crumbling under the weight of them all, and still not being a super long book.
But in the same way, I feel like I'm not even qualified to review that book.
No. You need a fucking master's thesis course on studying that book.
Yeah, English lit, yeah. So yeah, coming from books like that, where like the writing is seamless and flows so well, and then you just read these books and it's like...
You read Johnson the Mantis.
Read Johnson the Mantis and it's like sliding down a gravel hill on your ass, it's like so painful.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to say the book you hated the most was also Manatee Murders.
I hated Manatee Murders more than any other thing. No, it was so disappointing. I thought it was going to be like comedic and fun and just silly.
And I can feel that in the episode, the way you're ranting about it. That really is your episode to rant. Like,
because I actually, it took some convincing for Brady.
I wasn't sure about that one. I thought it was going to be too wholesome, too normal.
Yeah, you were like, oh, no, I kind of want to find something but then we were disappointed by several other books, that we couldn't use, and we ended up doing Manatee Murders.
Yeah.
Much to my delight. And then as I started reading it, and I was like, oh no, like, you dickhead, you've made a shit story.
But you can't really blame me, because after Apocalypse Deception, we wanted something amazing.
Yes, that's true.
And so Manatee Murders was up next. We had planned, but I was like, man, I think this book is going to anger us. We need something else. And we had found Hard Target, and I had to say, let's do that one first, and then go back to Manatee Murders. And then so we did.
I do love how we tried to go, we were like, after Apocalypse Deception, we were really going, all right, we need something a little bit more. Like, we need to get our heads straight, because I feel like dizzy with like stupidity.
Yeah. And it is funny how, the season progresses almost like a fictional narrative does, in the way that you have this rising action that peaks at Depth of Reality Unknown, which is the weirdest fucking thing ever.
Yeah.
And, we think that's the worst thing we're going to read. And after it, we were like, we need a simple action movie, like just some
fun thing. Yeah.
Just to clear our souls, cleanse our palate. And then we're knocked down even further. And it's like the only slight redemption we get is with Hard Target. And it takes us a little bit back higher, and then we're just straight back down with Manatees.
One way, and this might be a weird way of thinking about it, was like, if you think about the books as people, right? and you have to meet these people. You have to go out and talk to them.
Yeah.
So we go and talk to Johnson the Mantis, and he's kind of like just an asshole, you know, who is just like talking his own shit. Yeah, creepy guy, and like it's kind of weird. So we're like, whatever. And then we do Depth of Reality. We just talk to him, and he's like a blabbering. He's like an insane person standing on like a crate, like shouting to the masses, you know, just utter nonsense. And we have to talk to him for a little while.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, we really need to meet someone that's a little bit more, you know, just
stable.
Yeah, sensical and just not so insane. And then the next guy we meet is jacking off in front of us. And it's just like, well, fuck you, man. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, and then while he's jacking off, the next guy we meet comes along and fucking power strikes him.
Yeah, the next guy is just like, hey, you guys want to see something cool? And then opens up his straitjacket and reveals all his weaponry. You know?
His tungsten-coated Black Desert Eagle.
Tumbling.
But it is funny how our standards changed over the season. You know, we found China Strike. We're like, this is the worst thing ever.
We were so innocent back then.
But then by the time we read Depth of Reality Unknown, we're like, man, China Strike was really good, right?
China Strike was a real story.
Yeah.
Whatever that means now, like. So, yeah, I was kind of thinking of these books as people, and then we go to meet Manatee Murders, and we want to hear his silly story about manatees, and instead he just starts going up. It's like talking to an old guy who just goes off on a tangent about, like, speedboats, and you sit there and you're like, oh, my God, yeah.
Well, back in my days, the boats used to be able to drive real fast, and nowadays, you can't even drive them real fast, you know? All these goddamn manatee lovers.
And then Galactic Redemption 4. It's like one of those guys who's trying to pitch a story, and he's just like, what about a guy who is a master swordsman, and he was trained by an old wise master, and like he has a friend who's a pilot, you know, and he's got this animal companion, you know?
But it's not a Wookiee.
It's not a Wookiee.
It's a gargoyle.
Literally pitching you the idea of Star Wars and changing the names.
And then we come along with All Your Ruins, who reminds us that not everyone in the world is a fucking maniac.
Yeah, you know, this guy, he's got his story and he's telling it, and you're sitting there and you're nodding. It's not the best story you've ever heard in the world, but it is a story, you know? And what a way to finish up as well.
Yeah.
Finally, we meet someone who goes through the journey with us and finishes.
Yeah.
It just doesn't charge up as pirate and then walk out the door. God damn. I also want to talk about the endings of all of our books, because the endings have been just sometimes the most like kick in the dick thing after you read a book.
Yeah.
Because when you pick up a normal book, a good book, you read it and you have an ending, and maybe you're like, oh, well, you know, I wanted to see what happened to him, or like, you know, the ending left me wondering about this, but you're never like, hey, what the fuck? Like,
yeah, where is it?
What the hell? When we read China Strike, it ended, but it was like, so like, what? You know, like, so they didn't even save the guy, they just saved the American, and they just don't care.
And Bucket Full of Bullets were like, where's the fucking ending here? It's gone.
He just literally, he's done the shootout and can't be fucking bothered to write anymore. Like,
yeah, but here's an ad for my next book. Fuck you.
Yeah. And then Sword of Mortal Online shouldn't have even started.
We can't even talk about that book in comparison to the others, because it doesn't belong in the same critical category.
No, I mean, there's no story. He just fights mobs. Like, he begins the book, you know, he's like, oh, this new game, and you think it's going to go somewhere, but instead he just levels up, fights a new mob for the rest of the book. And then, like, the last chapter is the same thing, you know? And so there is no progression or change or anything. There's nothing.
I want to say that Johnson the Mantis perhaps had the most shocking ending to me. You know, by the end of Depth of Reality Unknown, I actually wasn't that surprised that it just cut off in the middle of the battle scene. By that point, I expected absolutely nothing and was like, whatever. I'm just glad to be done reading this. But Johnson the Mantis was the biggest what the fuck that this story is about a sci-fi adventure, or it seems like it's going to be, and then it ends up being some weird commentary on how real relationships are bad and I'm just going to fuck my half-sentient robot, and how much better that is than knowing a real person.
Even if you're writing like a shitty book, you still want the moral of the story or the theme to be like, you know, a good thing. Something, even if it's super simplistic, like the universe has to be in balance, or, you know, good and evil. I don't know, just anything. But having your story finish up with sex bots are better than real people is so like superficial and just perverted and silly that it was like, what the fuck?
And can we talk about just how many of the main characters in these books are fucking assholes? It's just become a recurring theme here. And it's funny to see what kinds of things recur in these episodes. That we find that so often the main character is a petty, selfish, often stupid, careless asshole.
Yeah, like, I mean, for example, in Bucket Full of Bullets, how the detective literally, like, just leaves the phone off on the prison wards. Like, because, like, fuck you, like, have a big phone bill, bitch. Like, like, my God, what an asshole. Like, and I mean, Johnson the Mantis is just literally, the guy's got asshole stamped on his face. Like,
yeah.
And Johnson the Mantis really is, I mean, Simon might be the biggest asshole out of anyone.
I think he is. Probably because he's the most aware that he's an asshole and he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like, he knows that's his personality. Whereas, like, Dominic Long, I don't know, he's like a grimy 50s detective. Like, I don't really expect him to be too self-aware on how much of an asshole he is for blackmailing someone over their sexuality.
Plus, he's so unrealistic that, like...
Yeah. I mean, he's, like, supposed to be an over-the-top character. Simon is a realistic male character, and that there are people just like him out there all the time who are just sexist and shitty and racist and would rather just have a freaky sex bot than meet a real person because it's that much easier. And he knows he's an asshole and he loves it.
Yeah. I mean, the guy from Manatee Murders is an asshole. Detective Doug Shearer. I mean, like, and he's also just a really shitty person, you know, constantly blowing off his, like, love interests just to go fishing or drinking.
He's more of, like, a lazy asshole, though. Simon, like, tries to be an asshole. He's always just saying, like, oh, you'd never have a better sexual partner than me.
Yeah, and not just with women. He also has this idea that, like, as long as the job is short and not, I don't actually have to do anything, that's the way that he hands off the murder case. You're, like, reading and it's like, whoa, there's been a murder on the ship. How's this going to play out? You know, this could go, like, how is this going to affect the story? And he's like,
as long as I'm not liable for any insurance damages, I don't fucking care.
Yeah, like, cops, can you come get the fucking dead body off and take care of this? Because I don't want to do it.
Or how he dresses Reza up in, like, plain clothes when he gets some passengers aboard so no one else wants to bang her.
Yeah, I mean, he's just a greedy, selfish asshole with absolutely no restraint. Like, he literally, like, you might be an asshole and have a sex bot, but having it in your workplace and just not even being subtle about it, being like, hey, if you want to work here, this is my sex bot.
Yeah, I'm frequently going to pause our mission duties to go bang her.
It's amazing how these people write these characters.
Yeah, and think that I want to follow this guy for 200 some odd pages and I'm going to sympathize with him like I'm some sort of freaky asshole too.
Yeah.
Like if I want to sit there and feel like I'm masturbating next to Brock Blount as he watches these girls have lesbian sex on the planes.
My God. It was funny in Apocalypse Deception and R.I.P. Sean Saunderson. I just cannot stress that enough because I've never seen a story throw out so much of what's going on to get to sex. Like, literally, there are 4 people in a plane and he couldn't even be bothered to think up a good excuse. He's like, all right, well, the plane just crashes, but they're fine. And Sean Saunderson is dead now. And just toss him off a cliff. Like, what?
And one of the reasons we were so frustrated with the sexual fantasy element of Apocalypse Deception was the original episode we recorded, which was sort of the practice episode, was a weird sexual fantasy, but it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
It was one of these copy-paste romance novels where the girl falls in love with a werewolf man and they bang.
Yeah. But you know it's going to be that from the very beginning. Right?
Yeah. We had expected that. And so we can't fault it too much for that.
Yeah.
I mean, the book was terrible, but
it is.
But either way, that's why we became so disillusioned. And by the time we get to Depth of Reality Unknown, and I say in there, every time we think we're going to find a book and it's not going to be weird sexual fantasy, it's what we always end up with. Jones and the Mantis was the only real sexual fantasy book that we had discovered that had aired. But it was actually the third book that we had come across that was sexual fantasy.
Yes.
There are little spots in our episodes that I noticed that I'm like, yeah, you know what? Like, it's going to seem a little wrong to the listener that we've only read one sexual fantasy and we're already like sick of it. Like, no, we've been through it before. It's not on air. I often wonder, who do we make this show for? Part of it is for us because we enjoy it.
Yes, I think for a large part, we are our own audience.
We also make it for people who find bad stories funny. You know, there's a whole culture around watching bad movies and enjoying them for the aspects that they get wrong.
Yeah.
So we do make our show in part for them, but I do hope that some of these authors get a listen to our show and try to understand where we're coming from.
Yeah.
And why we are so frustrated, why we are so angry, just in the hopes that they improve. That's what I want.
I mean, like, I always feel like we're just like, we're like screaming at a crowd that's just continually walking in the same direction. Just
yeah.
I mean, there are so many books coming out and there's no control over what's in them.
Yeah, every time we go to look for a new book, there's hundreds every day released on Amazon. So just depending on what day we go looking is what we'll find, because it's not like we're going to sift through 600 pages of books that have come out and since the last week we've recorded.
Did you know that Manatee Murders is actually quite an old book? It was made like 6-7 years ago and just got uploaded to Kindle.
No, I didn't know that.
Now, that's funny. I mean, it must have been sitting on shelves somewhere a long time before it got like...
before we found it.
And it still had errors. I mean, come on. Like, and I will say, a lot of the works we look at are self-published. Now, Manatee Murders, I think, was the only book that we looked at that was published through a small-time affair. So it wasn't actually self-published or vanity published. It was done by, like, a actual company and an actual publishing company.
Which is all the more shameful.
Yeah, but still, I mean... What library is this book sitting in? You know,
I want the paperback version.
Yeah, it's probably in Fort Myers,
and that's sort of why we don't review the typical bad books. You know, people have come to us and said, like, "Oh, aren't you going to talk about 50 Shades of Grey?" And it's like, no, you know, that book is extremely successful, and all the commentary you can make on it has been made already.
Yeah.
We're looking for stuff that no one has ever heard of, is never going to hear of, because that's where the interesting shit is.
Yeah. And it also, they're bad in different ways.
Yeah.
You know, the books that we're looking at, they're bad in every aspect, you know, like, whereas the 50 Shades of Grey, you can be like, oh, it's got a shitty story, or like, it's kind of superficial. But it's still written well. Like, it's still written like normal books are written.
Yeah, and when we say written well, we mean like without grammatical errors for the most part. You could argue that the prose is bad or whatever, but our standards are pretty low right now as far as what written well means, which means the basic bare minimum of English understanding.
Yeah, like a very, very low bar we have. And we still get books that disappoint us in that regard, you know?
Yeah, All Your Ruins was like a mess of grammar, but...
It's still, you know, compared to pretty much, I mean, I really don't know anymore. Like, I feel like now, maybe reading these books has hurt my own grammar, you know, because I feel like, oh, it doesn't actually matter so much. People will read this, you know?
Yeah. So, final thoughts? My favorite episode. I think we have a best episode and a favorite episode. My favorite episode is probably China Strike. And I say that because it's probably the time I spent most on editing.
Sure, I mean, yeah, for sure, definitely.
Because it was at first like 5 hours. We cut that down to 3. And then we cut that down to 1. But that wasn't just removing pieces of it. That discussion originally was so disjointed and all over the place that I really had to take, you know, stuff from 1 hour and 30 minutes and move it to 20 minutes and like really make that into a conversation.
Yeah.
And so I could spend a lot of time listening to China Strike, and I do think it's one of the funniest ones still, because Room Broom has become part of my regular terminology, and like
nasty little Room Broom.
Yeah, and I'm always telling people to snag that gizmo, like
yo, snag that gizmo and punch up the code.
That episode is probably my favorite one. Now, I do think the Depth of Reality Unknown is probably our best episode overall.
Yes, I also, from the feedback that we get, I will say that to other people, it's definitely the most shocking. Like, it's the most shocking and definitely the one that they have enjoyed most.
Yeah, and I think that's the turning point of the show from when it stopped being a show where two people read a funny book and talk about it to almost like an investigative report.
Yeah.
On like, what the fuck is this? Where did it come from? How does something like this get made? And what are we doing reading it?
Yeah, and analoging our fall into fucking insanity.
Yeah.
I think my favorite episode, I do tend to find that every time we make an episode, I'm like, this is my favorite one. You know, This one is my favorite. Now, but I do have a special love for Galactic Redemption 4. Now,
I was not expecting that.
The reason I love it so much is because I think personally, like, it was one that we were basing on previously known memes from our other episodes. We're like, oh, there's a gargoyle chapter in here. This is going to go well with our other things. Like, so the reasons that we actually ended, I was so excited to get into more gargoyle action. And like, so the reason that we picked that was not the reason that it didn't fulfill that either, because it didn't do shit with the gargoyles. And I was really hoping that we could get into some gargoyle nonsense, you know, but it disappointed me in that regard. But I think it's my favorite episode because definitely in the beginning, you know, I wanted 90% of that discussion to be gargoyle activities. Because I was so disappointed with the actual story.
Yeah, and from that, we will probably have a gargoyle theme book in season 2.
We'll try to find one. Yeah. I also think, we'll definitely go back to another kaiju horror book.
Yes.
I think we have to go back and do another detective story because we just continually fail to find
a real one.
Every detective story that we've found has just been like a steaming pile of horseshit. I mean, like, same with sci-fi. Like, like sci-fi, I mean...
The most legit sci-fi thing is in All Your Ruins when he has the harpoon that's attached to the tank.
Yeah, but I feel like All Your Ruins kind of falls into like post-apocalypse because we tried to do Apocalypse Deception and that wasn't a story. So then we were like, okay, let's go back. And originally it was quite funny because we were like, okay, we want to change genre a little bit every episode to keep it fresh. But then we ended up going back again because, like, we just didn't find, like, the book just didn't cover any of the basis of what that genre should be.
Yeah.
So we felt very in the clear to do it again, you know?
And we will probably revisit some of these genres again because we are looking for some that we can actually comment on some of the themes that are supposed to be in a genre, like detective.
Yeah.
Which we haven't yet. It always derails into some bullshit.
Just nonsense, yeah. One thing that I would like, I think, is a solid fantasy book.
Yeah.
I mean, we just didn't get that, really. We tried to do it with, I guess, Depth of Reality. Like, that was our fantasy book. I mean, can you really say that is any genre of book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a ripoff of Final Fantasy, which is clearly fantasy.
But
I'm not counting that as fantasy, so we do need kind of a schlocky fantasy novel to fit that space.
Yeah, I want like the Galactic Redemption 4 of Game of Thrones.
Someone who just epically fails to rip it off.
Yeah, that one to me would be so good, you know? Or like a Lord of the Rings type thing.
Well, hopefully we'll find a gargoyle story that will do that.
Yeah?
I would read Gargoyle Game of Thrones.
Yeah. Perhaps featuring Gigantus. Just Gigantus the Gargoyle in his own spin-off.
Yeah, Kim's going to write his own fanfic of that. He talks about Gigantus a lot. Outside of these episodes, all I hear about when he calls me is how he wants more of Gigantus.
I've been drawing pictures of him. I've been making fanfic pics of...
He's got a Gigantus sketchbook.
Yeah, I've been making lewd sketches of Gigantus.
Kim's got a whole weird fanfic where he's got Reza Gigantus and a little love nest.
I filled up a whole sketchbook of it. Well, so that's been our first addendum.
Yeah.
Now, I think the addendum's not going to stick to anything strict. We might, sum up the season, but we might do little activities on them, make little games out of them. Who knows? Who knows what we end up doing, but we're definitely keeping it loose.
Yeah.
So, if in the future, when this podcast has millions of viewers, people want us to talk about something, that's what we'll use this episode for.
Yeah, if they have questions they want to ask us.
Yeah, that we think deserve a public answer, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean... I often find that these books leave you lacking, they just leave you speechless. Yeah, what questions do you have? I mean, what can you ask?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, season 1 of the BurnCast. It's been fun. It's also been horrifying.
Yeah. And we'll see what happens next.
And with a big sigh of relief, we move on.
On to season 2.
On to season 2.